In this video, I'm just going to quickly run through all of the tools on the toolbar. So I'm just going to go through all of the tools in the toolbar. Okay, so the first one that we have here on the top left is the Move tool. Now if we turn on Auto Select and Show Transform controls, when we click on any item that we've got, we can click and drag it and move it around. We then have these little square boxes around the edge. We can click those boxes and drag and move the image to anywhere we want. Click OK when we're done. So that's the Move tool. The next one is the Select tool, the Marquee tool. And if we click on that tool, we've got a few different options. It starts off being a rectangular one, but we can also do elliptical ones and singular columns. If we do a rectangular marquee, we can draw an area, and it just means that we can only work within that selected area. So, for example, if I'm painting using a brush, I can only paint within that area that I have selected. What you need to remember though is we've got layers, and depending on which layer you're selected on depends on where that your paintbrush marks, for example, or your copy and pasting will go. So if I'm on this layer and I start drawing, I'm actually starting to draw over our person, okay, and that's on that top layer. So it's sometimes good to create a new layer. Hope you can see at the bottom, maybe you can't quite see it. You can create a new layer at the bottom using this little tab here, and that's now on a new layer. So for example, I draw on here, go to the Move tool, and you can see I can move this around and it's above and on top of my other layers. I can actually stretch it out if I wanted to stretch it out across that whole canvas. I can do whatever I like to it. Click the tick to accept. Okay, so you see that's on layer 1. I can turn that off with that little eye. The little eye is for turning layers on and off. If I've got some sort of odd selection like that going on my page, just go to Select and Deselect to remove it. Okay, so that's the Marquee tool. We can also use it for copying areas of images. So for example, I click on that tool, I'm going to drag and make a little rectangle over this girl's face. If I click on that layer, and this is the fashion photography layer, and then I click on my Move tool, I can actually move that bit of the image off. I can click and drag it and move it. Control Z to undo. I can also copy it. I can copy that selected bit. So I can do Control C on my keyboard, Control V, and what you'll see is on layer 2, above that layer, I've actually got a copy of that element of the picture. Now remember, this only ever happens on the layer that you're on. So for example, if I was on this layer here with the girl, and again I did a Marquee tool over here, and I went to my Select and I tried to move it around, I could move it around, but you see here, you could not move, the selection is empty. So you can only move things around if you're selected on the correct layer. So it's really important that you know which layer you're selected on at all times, and is sensitive to that. To get rid of any selection, as I just said, go to Select and Deselect. Let's just delete that layer now. If you ever want to delete a layer, the easiest thing to do is click on the layer you want to delete and hit the Delete key on the keyboard. Delete, and it's gone. Okay. The next tool here is the lasso tool. We probably won't use this very often, but it's basically a selection tool. So we can drag a line and we can draw a line, just freestyle, freehand, and that will create a selection. Sometimes useful, we don't often use it very much. The selection works exactly the same as the selection before. Magic Wand, I've introduced you to Magic Wand a number of times, so hopefully you'll be familiar with that. We then have the Crop tool just below, and that crops the canvas. Our canvas is set up at the very beginning when we open up Photoshop. If we drag in these sides, you can see what we're cropping, and we'll be making the canvas, the background, smaller by whatever amount. Click the tick to accept a crop once you're happy with it. The next tool down on the list is the Eyedropper tool. And this one is where we can pick up a colour from the background. So we can pick up that blue, we can pick up the pink on her lips. We can pick up the blue, okay? And you'll see that whatever colour we pick, it puts it into our colour palette here, and that is the current colour that we're going to be using. So for example, we're doing a brush, that colour there is the colour that our brush will be. Now notice this, I'm on the brush tool, we're just going to skip this one for a second, we're going to go to the brush tool. You notice I can't draw anything. And the reason is because I haven't selected a layer, I'm not working on any particular layer. You see none of my layers are selected. So to start drawing something, you need to select a layer. Let's select this one. And we can start drawing with our brush. And you see I've picked up that colour from the background image. Just undo that. Now our brush, we have lots of different brush heads that we can use. If we go on the brush, the top menu down at the top here, we have different options. We have the size of our brush. How big do we want that brush to be? We also have things like hardness. If we go into a classic default brush, which is just a round brush, we can choose the hardness. So for example, I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Make 100%. So for 100% hard, I'm going to interesting setting. Let's zoom in. Okay. So this brush actually seems to have a little bit of texture, but that's fine. On a 100% setting, you can see it's got a relatively crisp outside line. 100% hardness. If you turn that back to 0% hardness, you'll see it's got a very faint line around the outside. You can see it's almost barely there. So that's the difference in the hardness of a brush. Now we can change our brush. We can click on any brush that we want to use. And some of them have interesting effects. Some of them look like paint brushes. And we can just play around with different brushes as we want to. What you'll notice is this little cog on the corner, a settings thing. We can actually click on that and we can load more brushes. And down the bottom here is a load of different brushes that we can load up. Basic brushes is probably the number one that we're on. Are you sure you want to change it? Yes, we do. And we can change it back to basic brushes, which are quite the standard brushes. Another thing we have in the brush is we can set the opacity. So at the moment it's set at 100%, so it's 100% opacity. We can change that. We can change it now maybe to 50% or whatever we want, and you'll see it's a fainter line. You can see when we draw over itself, you'll see how that overlaps there. Another thing we change is the flow. Remember we're on 100% flow. If we turn that down, you probably can't see very well on this brush, but if you look at it more closely, it's a little bit more jittery, as it's not flowing quite as well. So I'm just going to do it down here. It's a bit faint to see because maybe I'll turn the pace up so we can see it a little bit better. I don't know if you can quite see, but it's a little bit jittery. You can see the jitters in it, so it's not flowing back smoothly. So these are all our brushes, so have a play with that. The quick way, once we're in brush, to change anything is to use right click. If we right click on that brush, we can make any change immediately. We can change the size, we can change the hardness, and we can actually change that brush on the fly as we're going along. The next tool I want to introduce you to is this one, and it's the clone stamp tool. If we click on our clone stamp, and we're going to right click to make this brush a bit bigger. So we've learned that we want to make this brush a bit bigger so we can see what's happening. So that's about right. We can clone an area of a picture across another side. So to do that, the first thing we do is we hold down the Alt key on our keyboard and it gives us this little target and it says where do you want to be copying the bit of the picture from. So I'm going to set my copy to be there. So holding down Alt still and click on the mouse. Now whenever I paint on this layer, select the correct layer. Whenever I paint on this layer, we're not working. Okay, yeah, I think I need to do it again because I was on the wrong layer. So make sure you're on the correct layer, hold down Alt and select your target where you want to be. Now, as you can see, that little image is showing me what I'm going to be, and you see I'm actually copying part of her hair from that place over there. Okay, this is quite useful actually. If we need to replace a colour that's very similar, we can use this maybe to pick up a colour on her forehead or a colour of her skin, just to touch up some blemishes and things like that. One tool I forgot to mention is the spot healing tool, and that's quite useful as well. Now obviously I've chosen a very perfect image that doesn't have any issues, but let's just say she did have a bit of an imperfection. I'm just going to put one in with my paintbrush, quite small, on her cheek. So every time we do have a little spot, a little mark on her cheek you want to get rid of, just like that. We can use the spot healing tool and make sure our tool is bigger than the area that we want to change. So I'm just going to turn my size up a little bit. And then we can click over that and you'll see it will heal that spot. It will use all the colours around it to create a heal area over that zone. So we can change the images like that. Okay, so what's next? We've got the rubber tool. We won't worry about the history brush for the moment. We'll just go with the rubber. The eraser tool is really simple. Just make sure you're on the correct layer and then erase what you don't want. This layer here, we can erase the areas that we don't want. The fill bucket, the paint bucket, again that's nice and straightforward, just like paint back in the day. Click an area and it will fill it all with one colour. Really nice, really simple. Do that. The next tool we've got down here is the blur tool. We probably won't use this very often. Again, I'm going to right click to make my blur tool a little bit bigger so I can see what's happening. And I can use that to blur part of my image if I want to. I can drag it over an area and blur it. We probably don't use it very often, but that's what it's there for. The pen tool and the text tool and the select tool we cover in other videos, so you should be familiar with those. The hand tool is just to move the canvas around. I've actually made it full screen so we can't do it. So just move the canvas around if we want to. And the magnifying glass is how we zoom in, and at the top there zoom out. Now for the magnifying glass I use a keyboard shortcut. I use Control and space to zoom in is what I click, and then a click button to zoom in, and Control Alt and space to zoom out. And that's just what I use. On this side of the screen over here, we've got our layers. We've got our layers, layer 1, and so on. We can pick these layers up, drag them around, move them around, do whatever we like. And at the top here we've got our history, and you can see all of these brush tools I've made, this lasso. So let's just go right back to the start because we don't actually want to. So we can just click anywhere in the history to go back again. There is a limited number of history, but it goes back quite a way. And this up here is our colour. This is the colour swatch that we're using, this pink colour here. Along the top we've got classic file, which is where we open a new document, or we save a document or export it. Under edit, this is where we can do copy and pasting, so we can select things and copy and paste them. Under image we can do auto tone, we can change our canvas size, and we can look at the adjustments. Layers, don't worry about layers for the moment, we won't use that often. Type, that's just for more features for your type tool. Select, we use the selecting quite a lot to deselect and select all. We can add some filters if we want. 3D we won't worry about, and so on. Okay, so that is an overview of Photoshop Window.